Keeping hundreds of thousands of Australians unemployed. Let's have a look. Hello everyone, Florian.heise here and welcome to another episode of HeiseSays. Grab your stein of coffee or hashtag unsponsored $1 coffee and let's have a look at this article from news.com.au written by Gareth Hutchins. This is an article discussing Economics Professor Ross Garnaut and saying Australia is voluntarily keeping hundreds of thousands unemployed. Now, a viewer sent this to me and asked me to have a look at it. So I haven't read it. I thought it'd be interesting to go through this together to see how we're keeping hundreds of thousands of Australians unemployed. So this could take a while to sink in. With weeks to go before the job seeker rate is cut, one of Australia's most respected economists has suggested there are potentially hundreds of thousands of Australians on unemployment benefits who shouldn't be. Professor Ross Garnaut, a professorial research fellow in economics at the University of Melbourne, has condemned Australia's economic policy makers for the situation. But his criticism refers to how they've been running the economy for years and not just the last 12 months. Well, I think a lot of us could be quite frustrated with that. I mean, this is the thing. Fundamentally, I would argue that any man-made intervention in an emergent system is always going to lead to unintended consequences, and chances are they're going to be worse than what benefits you derive from it. That's fundamentally an argument I would make. So we want to set up a system where the government is a caretaker and really steps back. And interventions that we see all the time are kind of socially unacceptable. I mean, that'd be nice. He's referring to the federal government and the Reserve Bank. He says their decision to allow hundreds of thousands of Australians to languish in unemployment in recent years to suppress wages and inflation as part of the country's broader economic policy settings has emasculated people and cost the economy hundreds of billions of dollars in lost economic activity. In his new book, Reset, another reset, guys, Restoring Australia After the Pandemic Recession, the professor says our policymakers should drop that policy and return Australia to having genuine full employment. He says that would mean an unemployment rate of 3.5% or lower, the lowest it has been since the 1970s. The unemployment rate is currently 6.4%. 6.4% according to the ABS, everyone. If we have a look at Roy Morgan, they have a different methodology for measuring unemployment. We have a look here. Here's the unemployment rate right now. The rule is you kind of double it to get the actual one, 11.7%. If you combine that with the underemployed, you're looking at 21.7%, everyone. It's a lot of people that are not working. And I would happily bet a carton that most of them want a job. Most of them want a job. You know. He says it's hard to know for sure, but that lower level of unemployment will probably be the point at which wages finally start to rise and inflationary pressures emerge. But we would have to test it. It could be much lower than that. Certainly it is lower than the well below 6% that Treasurer Frydenberg had said would trigger efforts to reduce the budget deficit, the professor has written. So the problem with Australia's economy is policy architecture. It's a scathing assessment. Between 46 and 75, when Australia pursued an official policy of full employment, the national unemployment rate averaged below 2%. Successive federal governments, both Labor and Coalition, deliberately recorded budget deficits to achieve that full employment. But since the 1980s, Australia's policymakers have accepted higher levels of unemployment, which they say are natural for prevailing conditions. They developed a new definition of full employment. Full employment would mean the level of unemployment that keeps a lid on inflation, that stops wages and prices growing too quickly. The ugly term for the level of full employment is the NAIRUA, or non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment. The professor says Australia's policymakers have repeatedly miscalculated the NAIRU in recent years, meaning they have often suspected the economy is getting close to full employment when it is far from that point. For example, consider a situation in which the national unemployment rate was 5.5% and falling, and the RBA suspected full employment, that it was 5%. This means the RBA would expect inflation and wage pressures to start building soon because the unemployment rate was apparently getting closer to full employment, so it would probably start lifting interest rates. And we've seen how good the RBA has been with regards to their, well, the wage predictions, hey? You know, spot on. Science, guys. It's science. So, this, yep. However, what if in this scenario the economy was only going to be in genuine full employment when the unemployment rate was 3%? This means the RBA would start lifting interest rates prematurely, when the unemployment rate was 5% rather than 3%, effectively killing the momentum in the labour market before everyone who wanted a job could find one. Well, see, this is the problem. He's critical of, looks like, the ways of measuring unemployment. I'd say the fact that we have a body here centrally managing and dictating the interest rates is more prone to error than not. The market should decide the interest rate, everyone. Some of these concepts are quite alien to people to contemplate, not even having a reserve bank. It could happen. Yeah. Then or what if we had multiple reserve banks? What if you had multiple currencies competing? Professor Garnett says Australia's policymakers have to stop guessing where full employment could be. We can find out where it is by increasing demand for labour until wages in the labour market are rising at a rate that threatens to take inflation above the Reserve Bank range for an extended period, he says. He says the difference between the actual level of unemployment and the lower level of genuine full employment represents people who are unnecessarily unemployed. The number of unnecessarily unemployed people is actually larger than this because more people would be encouraged to seek employment if unemployment rates were lower, he said. Well, yeah, people give up. People will give up. You lose hope. How many rejections or completely, well, being completely ignored can you take before you just lose hope and then you exit the labour market? So, I mean, there's another way to get unemployment rate down. Just break all these people's spirits and they'll all leave the labour force. He says the years since 2013 have been particularly bad. An average of several 100,000 fewer people were employed from 2013 to 2019 than would otherwise have been possible. This is voluntary unemployment. Voluntary for the Reserve Bank because it is unemployment that the Reserve Bank chose to allow. Or maybe they didn't intend to allow. Or they didn't realize that there was more room for, or their utilization ratios were off. At current levels of economic activity, having several 100,000 people unnecessarily unemployed holds annual gross domestic product down about 50 billion, below what it could be. And all other things being equal, raises Australia's public deficits by nearly 20 billion a year. Support for idea promoted by MMT. Professor Garnett says Australia should use as many resources as possible to get the unemployment rate down to 3.5% by 2025 as a matter of national urgency. He said the budget deficits needed to achieve full employment should be funded directly or indirectly by the Reserve Bank, at least until full employment is in sight. Now, my big criticism of modern monetary theory is that it's not modern. It's just a rehash of what they've done in the past. But for it to succeed, you generally just, succeed to implement the theory and to eventually see it fail, you need to give up more and more of your liberties and control to the state. That's the concern. More and more of it'll just degenerate into a more centralized control, more government control. I mean, we could definitely just print money to the moon and then employ everyone in government jobs. Is that actually adding any value to the economy? Or would it be a net negative? Because what's going to cost more? Keeping those people that you'd have in useless government jobs, paying them 6 figures a year, or paying them Centrelink. What's going to cost future generations less? I wonder. I think we all know what. So, that puts him squarely on the side of people like former Prime Minister Paul Keating and economists of the modern monetary theory school, who say the RBA has the power to create money itself to finance the federal government's stimulus spending. And so there's no reason why the federal government's deficit spending should be supported by an explosion in Commonwealth government debt. As things currently stand, the Reserve Bank is waiting for Treasury to sell new Commonwealth Government bonds via the Office of Australian Financial Management to private banks, pension funds and insurance companies that comprise the so-called secondary market before buying those same bonds from these private entities at an agreed interest rate. That traditional practice of raising money from the secondary market for government spending is what has led to the explosion of Commonwealth government debt over the last year. The professor says that it's unnecessary. We're really arguing about angels dancing on a pinhead when we talk about the difference, the professor told journalist Alan Kohler's Eureka report this week. The only difference between the government selling bonds into the market and then the Reserve Bank buying them is that you give a margin to the small number of players in the bond market and to the banks that participate in the trade. I'd say, let's take away their free lunch. Philip Lowe, the RBA governor, has repeatedly dismissed suggestions that the RBA should be directly financing the government stimulus spending. I mean, the problem is it's a dangerous path, guys. It can head down a road of just rampant. We need at least some measures to contain the temptation of just dipping into the cookie jar for our politicians. Then you'll get lefties voting for any old stupid handout, and it will just grow from there. And remember, every time the government creates money, even with MMT, it decreases the purchasing power of all the money you have. That's the traditional definition of inflation. They're increasing the money supply. Where does the money supply go in Australia? Usually housing. So, however, he's never said it's not possible. He's only said it's unnecessary. Well, you're right. I want to make it very clear that monetary financing of fiscal policy is not an option under consideration in Australia, nor does it need to be, he said in July last year. The Australian government is able to finance itself in the bond market, and it can do so on very favourable terms. So Australia's longest period of income stagnation. The professor has cast a brutal eye over the economic achievements of Australia's policymakers, especially from 2013 to 2019. 7 years from the China research boom to the pandemic. That period of time he has dubbed Australia's dog days. He said since 2013, Australia has stood out among developed countries for stagnant output per person and continued high unemployment and underemployment. Many Australians are accustomed to thinking of Japan as something of an economic basket case, he said. Hence, they're surprised to learn that from 13 to 19, we performed below Japan in the most important indicator of economic performance, economic output per person. Well, our GDP growth is going down per person since the GFC. We've been depressed. One could say the economy has been in a depressed state. Now, I mean, what does this come down to? Have we had it too good here in Australia? Have we certainly had it too good here? Have people become accustomed to, property always going up? There are people who literally think property can only always go up. And I'm seeing in the comments, there's some people who are complaining. And I notice this a lot, a sense of entitlement. I've seen it a few times. Like, I've got these two qualifications, I'd never do that. Or, I've been hired for this, and then they want me to do something slightly different to keep my job. I mean, for me, that screams entitlement. Insane entitlement. Just because you happen to have your, a degree or a trade, and they want to dare you to ask you to do something else to increase your productivity or to add more to the business, and you're too good for it. I encountered that first, actually, when I was a high school student working at Woolies. Seeing some of the people that would only work in their little section wouldn't actually do anything else. Well, that was a strange attitude, something I wasn't accustomed to. When I was a child, my father, he had a drafting business and a construction firm. And you know what happened when the drafting business slowed down? The guys didn't sit on their ass in the office. They were handed the shovel, and they were sent to site to dig foundations for some of the houses. Either that or you lose your job. I think some people are too precious about that these days. What do you reckon, guys? Do you think that's it? I mean, I've got 2 degrees. I've had my own business. When times were slow, I did everything I could to keep the family in money. I even was driving Uber. I was selling, everything that wasn't nailed down, guys. You can't be too proud for these things. Maybe some people are. Maybe that's the danger with having so many people just only knowing good times. So, in the best of circumstances, by 2025, Australians will have lived through the longest period of real income stagnation in our national history. Well, here's the thing. We're also in a time that's different to others. where you can avoid all of the pain and burden of hiring someone here in Australia through the magic of the internet, and you can offshore it. And there are lots of people that are doing it. That's the thing, guys. The unions need to remember that the next time they make all these demands. They're trying to push through some labour reforms, some industry reforms, and everyone's against it, thinking it's the end of the world. You know, maybe we can't be as spoiled as the previous generations, guys. Sometimes with the technology that we have access to, there's benefits and there's risks. So, the need for an economic stability board. He says the task of rebuilding the economy after the pandemic will be gargantuan, and it will require a new economic institution, much like the Reserve Bank. The independent authority, which is required now, is not a Reserve Bank board that only has the power to buy and sell government securities and alter interest rates, he said. The circumstances call for an economic stability board with power to constrain demand by fiscal as well as monetary means, to place a surcharge on major taxes if that serves better the rising interest rates. Yeah. Okay, see, this is the problem here. This is extreme economic intervention. Now, we've had economic intervention for the last 100 years. It creates these boom and bust cycles. It creates bubbles. It's screwing us all over. And this is just calling for more of that. More central planning. That's what we need. Now, where has that been tried before? And where has it failed repeatedly? Maybe we just need to look at all of the other economies. The more intervention into the economy, the worse it goes. Just look at the size of the Soviet Union, guys, and compare their economy to the US. You want to create jobs, you want to create economic activity, you step away. You let the market correct. Here in Australia, that would involve removing all of the support for the housing market. There's not going to be any political will for it. Honestly, I would say there'd be more political will to go down an insane interventionist path like this, because people will feel good, and it'll blow up in our faces in a decade's time, than there would to allow the market to correct. That's kind of a sad thing, isn't it? The board's power to adjust some tax rates will be two-sided, with tax cuts being on the agenda when growth sags below full employment rates and the scope of lower interest rates has been exhausted. There you go. That should be just what the government's doing, everyone. We should be reducing the size of our government. We don't need another bureaucracy to make these decisions. Let's reduce taxes. Let's reduce the size of government. If we're designing an independent agency to support economic stability now, we would make it an independent economic stability board and not an independent monetary authority. So let's make this change for the future as part of our economic restoration. It's a similar idea that was proposed by prominent Australian economist Nicholas Gruen. So other ideas. Are they going to get any Austrian economists on here? Are there any well-known Austrian-leaning economists in Australia? Is Adams the closest we have? Who else is there, guys? It's not even taught anymore. I guess people don't even realize there's another approach to things. That could be it. They're only used to seeing things one way. Oh, well, we've got this board. Maybe if we have another government board, that's it. Another organization of experts to come and manage a system. When all of those that have done it have just stuffed it up for years. They're just adding more complexity to a system where they can't possibly understand it. I mean, when I say emergence, do you understand the idea of emergence? That a system is more complex than some of its parts. We've got no way of getting an accurate snapshot of the entire economy in any instance. We can make models, but the complexity of the models is such that do we even have the capacity to accurately predict the outcomes? I would suggest that no, we can't. There's no way we can. Everything is always just an attempt or a rough guess, and so why bother? Imagine all those resources we're wasting on all these people that could be deployed. Imagine all the burden that they're putting onto the economy that isn't necessary. The professor has also thrown his support behind the idea for a guaranteed basic income for practically all adults, paid as the same level as the dole known as the UBI in economic literature, and a major reconfiguration of the way businesses pay company tax. All in all, he says Australia needs to take the opportunity to rebuild a new economy in the post-pandemic world rather than return to the dog days of 2013 and 2017. Well, I suspect the good professor's intentions are very noble. I don't like the idea of a UBI. I don't like the idea of another body coming in and intervening in the economy. I would love it if we had some people that are advocating for the Austrian School of Economics, and even just a caretaker government. How can we reduce the burden the state is placing on us? We've had 100 years of the government intervening in the economy, of special interest groups trying to influence this complex emergent system for their own goods, and there are always going to be others that will suffer, and then the market will find a way to adjust. And that's coming now that, well, Australians aren't getting wage rises. Work is getting offshored. We're deindustrializing. You've got to think about all the red tape, all the green tape, all the onerous burdens that are put onto people starting a business here. And then, you've got a housing bubble, which is being supported by the government. Even through the first recession we've had in 28 years. A pandemic that's shutting down parts of the world. And they're throwing money at the housing bubble. Why start a business, guys? Why bother employing people? So what do you think, everyone? What do you think? Do you think we need to go down this path? Do we need another board to help ensure economic stability? Or can we see that ending in utter disaster? Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below. Thank you all for watching. Please like, share, subscribe to the channel. If you're a fan and enjoy the content I create here, there are a few ways you can support us. You can join us on YouTube or Patreon. You can support us using our affiliate links from Amazon, eBay, Independent Reserve, or HeiseSays. Take care, guys. I'll see you all next time. Bye for now.